The boy didn't understand why the lodge was so low to the ground. It crouched against the snow like an animal ready to leap. Not tall like the lodges he'd seen in the summer camps on the plains, not wide like the big meeting homes near the river. This one was small, tightly built, sloped like a hill, with snow packed up the sides and fur draped over the entrance like a secret. His uncle, Gray Feather, stood beside it now, spear in hand. And then, without warning, he stabbed. The spearhead struck the wall of the lodge, but it didn't pierce. It thudded against the layered bark, hide, and ashwood ribs, then bounced back with a muted grunt. Cold Branch flinched. "Don't fear it," his uncle said. "It's not built for beauty, it's built to survive." Gray Feather turned, walked to the top of the lodge, and dumped a full basket of snow down onto it. The roof didn't sink, it didn't sag. It let the snow roll down both sides like a second skin. Cold Branch wanted to ask, why? But he'd already asked too many questions today. That evening, as the light thinned and smoke curled like fingers through the forest pines, Cold Branch watched the hunters return. They said nothing. But they moved fast, too fast. One of them leaned in to whisper to Gray Feather. The old warrior's eyes narrowed. Then he looked toward the mountains. "The wolves have crossed early," he said. "And someone's lit a false fire near Black Rock." The elders called a quiet council under the frost glow of stars. No drums, no chants, just hands moving over fire maps drawn in ash and bone. They didn't speak of war, but they didn't have to. In this valley, no one lit a signal fire unless they wanted to be seen or wanted to lure someone in. Cold Branch was told to stay close, to prepare the lodge, to fill the water pouch and pull the hide curtain down tighter at night. "Why?" he asked his uncle when no one else was near. "Because fire draws wolves," Gray Feather said. "And wolves draw other things." The snow deepened that night. The wind was soft, but the cold had teeth. Cold Branch curled into his fur mat, tucked into the sleeping circle sunken below the lodge floor. It was warmer here, deeper, packed with pine needles and dry moss. Above him, the smoke vent let out breath without letting the heat escape. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. Gray Feather sat awake at the door, spear across his lap. The lodge didn't creak, it didn't shift, it held. And in the silence, Cold Branch began to realize this wasn't just shelter, this was armor. The cold stayed, but the lodge did not surrender. Each morning, Cold Branch rose to see his breath float like a spirit above him, but his skin remained warm. The fire had burned low through the night, yet the heat held tucked into the earth, trapped by the walls. He crawled from the sleeping pit and listened to the sounds of a camp that barely stirred above the snow. No dogs barking, no horses snorting, just the muffled hush of a world covered in white. Gray Feather was already outside, kneeling at the rear of the lodge with a fresh pelt in his hands. He nodded for Cold Branch to join him. "We lay this last," he said, "not for warmth, but to break the wind's memory. The wolves remember scent, the wind remembers fire." They spread the fur over the outer bark, lashing it with rawhide. Then Gray Feather showed him the smoke hole, angled not straight up, but toward the east slope, where the morning sun would hide it in its light. Beneath the vent, the fire pit was sunken just like the sleeping circle, feeding air upward in a slow spiral that carried the smoke gently, quietly. "We don't let the fire roar," Gray Feather said. "We let it breathe." Inside the lodge, Cold Branch noticed things he hadn't before. The ribs of the structure were not spaced evenly, but intentionally closer near the ground, wider toward the top, creating a natural curve that pushed heat downward. The wall layers were packed not just with bark and hide, but dry moss, crushed sage, and clay. He touched the seam where one wall met the next. No draft, no light, just silence. He looked at his uncle. "Why is it shaped like this?" Gray Feather sat, resting one calloused hand on the lodge floor. "Because storms don't strike high. They sweep low, so we go low. And when enemies come, they see mounds, not homes. If they throw torches, the snow catches them. If they listen, the lodge does not answer." He tapped the floor once, lightly. The sound didn't echo. It disappeared into the earth. Cold Branch felt it in his bones. Later that night, the boy sat alone inside as Gray Feather met with scouts. He pressed his ear to the wall. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, not hungry, just claiming space. He closed his eyes. The sound barely reached him. The lodge held breath like a living thing. It sighed and warmed and watched. And Cold Branch, for the first time, began to understand what it meant to build with intention, not to conquer the land, but to survive with it, to know its winds, its angles, its habits, and to become invisible in plain sight. It began with silence, a silence too complete. No birds, no cracking branches, no whispers from the trees. Only the sound of breathing human, sharp, measured, rising from the scouts who returned just before dawn, their faces drawn, their steps stiff with urgency. They didn't shout. They knelt at the council fire, still unlit, and drew with fingers in snow. The first mark was a circle, a camp. The second was a black line, a trail. Then came the smudge of ash, wiped across the snow like spilled blood. The raiders had passed through the camp of the Red Rock people. Nothing remained. No dogs, no horses, no smoke, no bodies. Just quiet. They didn't take, Gray Feather said, they erased. In the hours that followed, the village became a new shape. No orders were given, but the people moved as one. Fires were extinguished. Pelts were removed from lodge tops and replaced with snow-packed bark. Paths were brushed over with evergreen branches. Food was moved underground. Every trace of warmth and life was buried not out of fear, but out of design. Cold Branch helped where he could. He packed snow along the base of their lodge, blending it into the earth. Gray Feather had him smear wet mud over the inner seams, then layer it with frozen moss. The door flap was reinforced with an extra hide, then buried beneath a second snow curtain. It looked less like an entrance now, and more like the side of a hill. If they come, Gray Feather said, they'll see nothing. That night, the sky turned heavy. Snow returned in soft flurries, coating tracks, muffling footsteps. Cold Branch lay in the sunken bed pit, wide awake. His uncle sat at the fire, not feeding it, only watching it fade. Then came the first crunch outside. Not a wolf. A boot. A slow, deliberate step. Then another, and another. Cold Branch held his breath. Outside, shadowed shapes passed. 5, 6, more. Silhouettes in the snow, cloaked in darkness and breath. One bent low at the entrance, sniffing like a dog. Another raised a hand to throw something aflame, but the torch flickered and went out in the snow-slick wind. He cursed softly, then moved on. Inside, Gray Feather did not move. His hand rested on his spear. His eyes watched the smoke spiral vanish into the angled vent, soundless. The footsteps circled the lodge, then disappeared. More passed by. Some stopped, some whispered, but no lodge was breached. No shout was raised. When morning came, Cold Branch pushed the hide aside carefully. Outside, in the clearing, footprints wandered in circles. A single torch lay buried in snow, unlit, half burnt. And in the trees beyond, a wolf watched, not hungry, just curious, as if wondering who had beaten them, to the hunt. The sun rose behind a curtain of snow, casting no warmth and no shadow. But something had changed. In the early light, scouts found the sign's dark shapes half buried, not in snow, but in silence. A raider's torch dropped and stomped out. A set of footprints that ended abruptly, not at a lodge, but beside a snow wall that had collapsed intentionally. The kind of collapse you build, not fear. One scout found blood frozen in the ice, where a spear had struck from beneath a snowbank. No alarms had been raised, no cries of war, and yet the village had survived an attack. The elders did not meet openly. They passed word by glance, by gesture. Children were told to stay inside. The dogs, once tethered, were now let loose, silent runners, trained to patrol without barking. They were taught that way for a reason. In this place, silence was not weakness. It was a weapon. Cold Branch sat beside his lodge and watched his uncle repair a small snow wall with a curved branch and a handful of pine boughs. They never touched a lodge, Gray Feather said. Why? Cold Branch asked. They had numbers. Because they saw no fire, no life, no fear. They thought we had gone, or become ghosts. He tapped the side of the lodge with his knuckles. This wall held more than heat. It held the story we wanted them to believe. Later, scouts returned with news. The raiders had circled, regrouped, and moved east. They had lost one, maybe two. They never entered the village fully. They never returned. The lodges had fought without rising, without shouting, without showing their strength. They had simply remained invisible, unreadable, unmoving. Every layer of snow, every choice of bark or hide, every angle of the vent, a defense disguised as stillness. That day, Cold Branch helped dig the food stores from beneath the snow. As he worked, he noticed something strange. The scent of the smoked meat, strong and sharp inside the lodge, was almost gone outside. He realized it had been buried under layered bark, sealed with cold mud, and then capped with animal fat. A technique so subtle he hadn't seen it even as he helped do it. "They couldn't smell us," he whispered. Greyfeather smiled. No scent, no sound, no fire, no target. That night, firelight returned faint, low, controlled. One by one, people emerged from their mounds of snow and silence. No songs were sung, no victory chants, just nods. Just eyes that had seen something ancient confirmed once again. A lodge is not just a home. It is a trap woven from warmth, a spear hidden in stillness, a shield that breathes, and when built right, it fights not with force, but with patience. Years passed. The blizzard that swallowed the forest faded into story. The raiders never came back. The wolves found easier prey in warmer valleys. And the village remained, quiet as ever, its lodges now grown soft with time, not because they weakened, but because they settled deeper into the earth, more stone than shelter, more memory than wood. Cold Branch grew into his name, and then beyond it. When his own son was born, the world had changed. The old dangers had not vanished, only taken new shapes, strange travelers, shifting herds, longer droughts. But the way of shelter remained the same. Cold Branch built their first lodge not with ceremony, but with purpose. He dug the sleeping circle first low and wide, just as his uncle had taught him. Then he shaped the ribs with bent ash branches and softened bark, lashed with rawhide soaked in pine tea to keep it supple. He lined the inner walls with moss dried by his mother's hands and added thin layers of insulating clay between bark panels. At the top, he left the vent open just wide enough for smoke to pass, but angled it east toward morning, not danger. His son watched as he pressed snow along the lodge's base, not to block the cold, but to disguise the heat. When the boy asked why they built low instead of high, Cold Branch smiled and said, "Because the storm listens before it strikes." And when the boy asked why the lodge didn't face the river, where the view was better, he said, "Because wolves don't hunt where the wind has no memory." Each answer was a layer, each lesson a new wall. By then, many families had adopted changes from other lands. Some used woven mats, some raised their lodges higher. But Cold Branch's remained low and hidden. His neighbors called it old-fashioned. Until one year, a long winter returned. The new lodges sagged under snow, their walls cracked with ice. Smoke failed to rise. One even caught fire from a vent too tight, packed wrong, pulled by the wrong wind. But Cold Branch's lodge, it breathed, and it held. One elder, visiting from another valley, knelt at the edge of the sleeping pit and said, "It's warmer in here than in my dreams." Cold Branch nodded. "It remembers how to survive." And that was the truth of it. Because in every bark panel, every sinew twist, every vent angled to the wind, the old ones were speaking. The wolves no longer circled, the raiders no longer came. But the design remained carved not in wood, but in wisdom, not just shelter, but testimony. To build a lodge was to remember the world did not care if you were warm, only you did. And to survive it, you had to become part of it, to blend, to disappear, to breathe but not bleed. So the lodges stayed, not because they were strong, but because they were wise.